You're listening to Caravan broadcast on CKUT 90.3 FM on the dial www.ckut.ca on the internet. We continue with our coverage about Israel-Palestine, this with news from here, from Montreal. The Jewish National Fund is holding a fundraising dinner on federal government property on June 12 at Montreal Science Centre in Old Montreal. Some of the people who are following this activity and calling for a protest is Ron Saba. He's with us on the line from Montreal. Ron Saba, welcome to our show and thank you so much for being with us. I received this email by which you informed us of the gala dinner and fundraising by the Jewish National Fund. You also express your reservations about this event. Would you like to share it with our listeners?
Yes, thank you. Yes, the Jewish National Fund, which unfortunately and improperly is listed as a charity here in Canada, indeed is the largest landowner within the state of Israel. And indeed it is a prime instrument for racial discrimination, segregation, and ethnic cleansing in Israel.
In what way?
Well, the Jewish National Fund, its bylaws and operations state that it will not lease any of its property to anyone unless they're Jewish. Now, one has to keep in mind that 25% of the citizens of Israel are not Jewish, and which is similar to, for example, in Canada, roughly 20% of the citizens of Canada are, for example, French Canadian. And as a landowner, the JNF is saying we won't lease these apartments or lease this property to you unless you're a Jew. And so that is discrimination in the provision of housing. It would be similar to, for example, a landlord here in Canada saying we won't lease to you because you're French Canadian or because you're black or because you're Jewish. It's racial discrimination, and here in Canada, it's against the law. It's against the Human Rights Act of Canada. However, the Jewish National Fund has been able to set itself up and present a facade as if it's some type of ecological organization, and has gotten charitable status from the government of Canada, and raises money here in Canada through these annual dinners that it holds in major cities all across Canada, which it raises millions of dollars. And the money is being raised for an organization whose bylaws and operations are racist.
So there are two problems here. Let's address them one by one. The first one is to say that it's a racist organization because it discriminates against Israelis. Like there are some citizens that are more citizens than others, and you mentioned that 25% or 20 or 25% are those who are of Arab origin. Right?
Exactly.
Okay. So you also mentioned in your communiqué, your email, that this discrimination is even denounced in Israel by the Attorney General of Israel, the U.S. State Department, and the United Nations. Do you have some facts to support this?
Yes. In 2005, the Attorney General of Israel, Mr. Menachem Mezuz, ruled that the JNF's bylaws represent racial discrimination, and this is was well covered in the Israeli press and frankly in the international press. And I can just read you a little summary of his decision taken from an article from the Jewish Daily Forward in the United States. The decision, that being the decision by the Attorney General, forced the Government Lands Authority to stop marketing properties owned by the JNF, whose bylaws require it to lease its properties to Jews only. The Attorney General's ruling followed appeals to the Supreme Court by two Israeli civil rights organizations claiming that the exclusion of Arab Israelis from JNF properties was racist and violated the principle of equality before the law. And the justices had ruled in an earlier case that Jews-only clauses were illegal. So in 2005, the Attorney General of Israel ruled that the JNF's bylaws and operations represent racial discrimination, and that was also repeated in a recent report by the U.S. State Department which made reference, in fact, to the ruling by the Israeli Attorney General. And in the if you go to the United States State Department website, you can find. Now I'll quote. It's talking about the JNF. It says, according to 2005 Attorney General ruling, the government cannot discriminate against Arab citizens in marketing and allocating lands it manages, including those of the JNF.
So it has been something like 8 years since this has been decreed, and up till now there has been no change. No,
and actually it goes even further back than that, because the United Nations in 1998 made a similar ruling about the Jewish National Fund, saying that because it operates to benefit Jews only within Israel, that it represented, and I quote, an institutionalized form of discrimination. So this has been well known for quite some time, and in fact, in 1991, the CBC Fifth Estate documentary ran a documentary well viewed at that time about the Jewish National Fund and about the racial discrimination and about the ethnic cleansing related to it. So this is not something that's unknown. It's well known within the international community, and it's in fact known within the Canadian government.
But still, the Jewish National Fund is holding every year those funding drives, and they're attended by high-profile officials, whether from the government, provincial or federal.
Yes, unfortunately so. Although I think the pressure by citizens and human rights and social justice groups over the recent years has reduced the participation by federal government MPs and so on, with the exception last year of Minister Kenny and Minister Baird of the Harper government, who actually both were guests of honor at JNF fundraisers in Canada. And indeed, to make it even worse, at the end of this year in Toronto at a fundraiser by the Jewish National Fund, their guest of honor will be none other than our Prime Minister, Stephen Harper, which is really quite, when you think of it, it's quite absurd, and it's a violation of Canadian law, because these are representatives of the government who are supposed to uphold the laws of Canada, which
precisely. I was going to ask you about that. Is there something in our laws that says that you cannot discriminate?
Yes, both provincially and federally. It's quite clear. The Canadian Human Rights Act is quite clear. It says that discrimination in the provision of housing, you cannot discriminate on the basis of any basis. You cannot discriminate on the basis of race, of religion, of national origin, of sex, of handicap, and so on. It's against the law to do that. And similarly here in Quebec, and in fact in every jurisdiction. So the law is quite clear that the JNF's bylaws and operations violate Canadian and provincial law, and the government is aware of this. But politics being as it is, and the lack of media coverage being as it is, there has been no action on their part. Now, there have been movements in other countries. The United Kingdom is there's quite a movement to have the charitable status of the JNF revoked.
Yeah, well, this brings us to the charitable status. But before, now talking about our officials, Ron Saba, you've been an activist for a long time, and you know this subject very well. Did you send letters, protests? I mean, we've seen the picket lines, but did you send letters of protest to the officials at the government, and what was the response?
Well, yes, actually, many citizens over the years have done that. They have written specifically to the Minister of National Revenue, who is responsible for the charities designation through the Canada Revenue Agency, written many times to them, and in most cases, it's a standard non-answer is provided, which tries to hide behind unrelated aspects. And in fact, in 2007, I actually filed a complaint with the Human Rights Commission here in Canada against the Canada Revenue Agency because it refused to follow the Canadian Human Rights Act. It refused to revoke the status of the JNF, even though it clearly violates Canada's anti-discrimination laws. And In fact, the Canadian Human Rights Commission, after looking at it for a number of months, decided that they weren't going to look at it. So basically, you almost have an admission from them that they don't want to look at it because they know if they did, they'd have to rule against the Canada Revenue Agency. And since they had the ability not to look at it, they did. So basically, at every level of government, there is an awareness, there is a knowledge that this is wrong, but there is inaction. And it's been like that for quite some time. However, the pressure is mounting, not only here in Canada.
Ron, I'm going to interrupt you here so that we just explain that the Jewish National Fund has a charitable status in Canada, right? Yes. Okay. Yes. So anybody who contributes funds to this organization can have his taxes deducted, like.
Exactly. So what it means is that if you donate, if you donate $100 to the JNF, and if all that portion is deemed to be tax deductible, you reduce your taxable income by the amount of your contribution, and which therefore reduces the amount of taxes that you pay. So in effect, the federal government is subsidizing the JNF's operations by giving you a tax rebate, in effect, for the amount that you donate to the JNF. So, in effect, money is flowing from the Canadian government through the tax rebate to the JNF. So, the Canadian government is subsidizing JNF racial discrimination.
All right. Now, how about this year? What's happening? I mean, are there any groups that are picketing outside? How are those who are expressing their reservations about this event? And it's taking place, as you said, at the Old Port, and it's on federal property, right? Federal government property.
That's right. It's a week from today, Wednesday, June 12th, at 6 p.m. at the Montreal Science Center, which is in fact in Old Montreal, and it's actually a federal property. It's on the King Edward Pier in Old Montreal. That's when the JNF's holding its fundraising evening, which there is a number of ways that I think concerned listeners can take action in this place. One of them is a picket, and every year there at all the different sites of the JNF dinners there has been a picket. But there's another way that I think listeners might be interested in taking action here if they oppose racial discrimination. It's of note that one of the guest speakers for this event happens to be a very senior executive of Hydro-Quebec. The gentleman's name is Elie Saheb, who's an executive vice president of Hydro-Quebec. Now, Hydro-Quebec is a publicly owned entity. It's owned by the Quebec government. And the Quebec government has a very clearly stated anti-discrimination policies. It says that no one affiliated with Hydro-Quebec can discriminate. It's stated that Hydro-Quebec ne tolère donc aucune forme de discrimination. So Hydro-Quebec doesn't tolerate any form of discrimination by any employees towards anyone. So what we have here is a situation where a very, very senior member of Hydro-Quebec is listed as helping the JNF raise funds. He's a guest speaker at this event, and obviously a big attraction to bring in people. And so the Hydro-Quebec employee is aiding a racist organization to raise money for its racist operations. I think that concerned citizens, seeing that Hydro-Quebec is owned by the government of Quebec, should contact their member of the Quebec National Assembly and say, look, here's the senior person of a government organization who is promoting a racist organization, and that's just wrong. And as my member of the National Assembly, I would like you to raise this on the floor of the National Assembly and to ask for an investigation. And in my view, this gentleman should be relieved of his duties. I mean, he's publicly promoting an organization which is known to act in a racist fashion, and it's unacceptable. And that there is no room for this in anyone, and particularly not in a government representative who represents all of us.
Ron Saba, thank you very, very much for all this information. This is all what our time allows us today, and I hope our listeners will pay due attention to this very important issue. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you very much.